Hey everybody, I'm Jimmy with the Triple C Collective, and today joining me for episode 3 of Collective Conversations is Scoot McMahon. He is artist, cartoonist, and man, I love. Thank you for joining me. I'm so excited for you to be here. So Scoot, say hi. Say hi to the
Hey,
people.
hey everyone. Hey Jimmy, thanks for having me on. I'm a big fan of all your interviews and your reviews you do. So yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man, I've been a big fan of your work from all of your collected stuff here.
There they are. Yeah,
But more importantly, as much as I love all of those books, nothing is better than this commission piece that I got from you. It
that's one
is
of my
so
favorites. Yeah.
I love it. Like, to say that you just nailed everything that I wanted on here is an understatement.
Oh, thank you.
I
Yeah,
like
I still get compliments about that because I post it every now and then when I let people know like I'm doing commissions. I use that as one of my samples and
yeah,
people love it. Yeah, that was a great idea. Yeah, you had and because everyone loves those universal turtles, I guess they were called universal
yeah.
monsters turtles. Yeah.
Yeah, they had a great line in the 90s and now NECA's bringing them back now, so it's awesome. Um, but for you now, I want to know, like I start out with everybody, what's your origin story? Like
Yeah.
you've been an artist, a cartoonist, illustrator. I mean, for years, you've got plenty of published work out there. Like what's your origin story? Where'd you grow up? What made you get into it?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess my origin story goes all the way back to the very beginning. I've been drawing since I was 2 years old. I guess even at like a very young age like that, people could tell that um I had an aptitude for drawing. I was able to pick it up and learn quickly and draw pretty well. I draw with my fist, and this is the same way like a 2 year old draws. So I don't know if some of that just like was it kind of stuck with me, but it's just I still draw like that. And I grew up in Rossford, Ohio, where I live now. I moved back here after going to college. I went to public school, Rossford High School, and all through the years, I was always drawing in my margins, always telling stories. I have two younger brothers, Tim and Jeff. We used to always draw like on our tummies in the living room
Mm-hmm.
every day. And then over the years, I kept going and they kind of fell off the drawing train, but they're still, those two are still pretty talented artists as well. But yeah, it's always been a part of my life. I've always been into cartoons and comics. So I just pursued that at every level. So high school, you take those tests that tell you what you're going to be when you grow up. I always kind of knew in my head as I was taking the tests which ones would come out on the other end as like illustrator or cartoonist. And then I went to Bowling Green State University here in Ohio, Northwest Ohio, and I majored in basically like sequential art there, and 4 year college. And then yeah, that's when I started did my own like first like actual comic. I mean, I always did comics as a kid and in high school where I would staple books together like little, you know, um my dad
Build
worked
your
at
own
the
and stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
and my dad worked at the Toledo Edison in the offices, and he would bring home computer paper, stacks of computer paper, and then we would draw on there, and he would take the paper back and he would put it through this binding machine and actually bind our comics into books, like yeah, and
Oh,
then sometimes make prints of them like coloring books. So I would do like Justice League coloring books or whatever. This was like late 80s, early 90s. And yeah, I just always stuck with it. And like I said, I started going to comic conventions and stuff at the end of my college run there, just as a I don't know what you would call it, like a visitor of the show, like a
yeah.
guest. Like I didn't get a table or anything. I would just bring a portfolio and go to all the Marvel booths and DC booths, especially in Chicago and Detroit were the two, Motor City Comic Con and then the old Chicago Comic Con, which became Wizard World at Rosemont
Mm-hmm.
before C2E2. And I used to go there. And then, after a while, I decided to get a table, and the rest is history, I guess. So it's just like a long road, but it's never felt like uh, I mean, there's ups and downs, there's struggles, but drawing has always been the one constant that has always been something that's, been my go-to. It's like I always think like if I could try time travel back to any age, there I'd probably chances are I'd find myself drawing somewhere.
There you
So
go.
yeah.
That's awesome. So you grow up in Ohio. Your dad is binding your comics as a little kid. That's
Yeah.
so awesome. That's like amazing. Um, but early on though, for the cartoons, like were you reading comics straight away yourself? Because for me, I get to comics through cartoons.
Me too. Yeah.
Okay.
That's that's my origin. I mean, comics were always around. We always had them like in the house because I lived pretty close to a 7-Eleven,
Oh,
and they always
absolutely.
had spinner racks growing up. So I would
Mhm.
buy like Batman or Spider-Man or Justice League or even like Ren and Stimpy comics or like cartoony ones once in a while.
Yeah.
Um, but so we always had them, but it was really the cartoons of the 90s, right? Like Batman, the animated series, X-Men, Spider-Man, like DuckTales, all those really
Mhm.
got me into comics because then I would specifically like I knew the characters, so I felt like I could pick up any like Disney comic and I knew most of the characters from the afternoon shows that they had, the great shows back then. And then of course my favorite comic still to this day is the Batman Adventures based on the animated series with
Yeah.
Mike Parobeck drew a lot of those, and Paul, not Paul Dini, but he wrote a couple of them, and even
Yeah.
Bruce Timm illustrated a couple of them. But those were the ones that really got me into it. But mostly it was like cartoons and movies and video games were what inspired me to draw as like a little kid, and then eventually it pulled me into the comics world.
Nice.
In
Yeah.
the video store, sorry to interrupt, but the video
No.
store in town too, the Video Connection it was called, they had comics and they had arcade games, and then we would rent video games and movies. I kind of miss that. My kids don't have that, the video, and I know you know all about that,
Yeah.
but that's where like that was the other cool like place where you could find like cool hip like new like comics and games and different things like that. So I
Yeah.
kind of miss 7-Eleven having comics and video stores and all that stuff. So
Right. The spinner
yeah.
racks and stuff in
Yeah.
grocery stores. That's like so funny because that's just like it's all magazines now.
Yeah.
Like they took out the comics and just put in like just magazines and stuff for people.
I know.
Um, Batman the animated series is still one of the most like it's one of the greatest things in the world.
Yeah.
It like I love it. X-Men, I love X-Men 97 has been
Yeah.
great. The
I just caught up on it. Yeah.
it's so
It's
good.
yeah.
It's so good.
It really I would even say I would say it's better than because I rewatched the original series and I have nostalgia for it, but I
Uh-huh.
would say this new one is it's just better quality and the writing seems a little bit better because I think they're writing it for like a little older audience. So those old
Hmm.
episodes are great. I loved them as a kid, but rewatching them, there were a lot of hard ones to get through that just were kind of clunky. But the new X-Men so far has been excellent. So
Yeah. The animation is just so slick and stylish and stuff for it. It's great.
yeah.
Um, so then, so it's video games, it's comics. Is there an in particular one of a game, a comic, or anything that you pick up, that you read, that you're just so blown away that you're like, this is what I want to do for like the rest of my life?
Yeah, so as a kid, I never really kind of knew. I thought maybe I wanted to do animation, but then I would like read up or people would tell me about animation and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Like I want to like do everything. Or I would see like a cereal commercial like Tony the Tiger. I'd be like, oh, that'd be cool to draw Tony the Tiger. But then I would think about it more. So I think what it really was those Batman Adventures comics in the early 90s based on the animated series where I would read those and it was like less is more. Those books would have like 3 to 5 panels per page. They weren't like cluttered with
Mm-hmm.
like in the 90s a lot of the comics were like over like everything was packed in there. Like I remember the X-Men books back then. Like I love the cartoon, but then I would go get the books and there'd just be like word balloons all over the place and panels stuffed in. But the animated series Batman Adventures comics were they were just paced well and they
Yeah,
looked cool and they gave breathing room to everything. They gave a, so it was very cinematic. It felt like watching a cartoon episode, reading those comics. So those were the ones where I was like, this is what I want to do. Like all this time, like I want to draw like the cartoon style, but I want to draw like this format where it's like clean and easy to follow. That's what I want to do.
that's awesome. Um, so you said you were drawing in high school
Yep.
and going in college. Now in high school, were you taking like art classes and stuff there too, or was it just kind of like you were saying in the margins of your like notebooks on like your free time and stuff as well?
Yeah, no, I was lucky. I had a great art teacher all the way through elementary school too. So one of the things, like I said, I always would hold my pencil like this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my, the homeroom teachers or whatever in grade school would put these grips on my pencil to force me to write like this. But luckily, my art teacher, Mrs. Fredericks, was like, when you're in art class, you can draw or do write however you want. So
Mm-hmm.
then after a while, I think, there was a point, I think, in third grade where I took the art classes with the rest of the students, but Mrs. Fredericks recommended that I also take an extra art class. So I would take third grade art classes, and then I also take art with the sixth graders as well. And
Wow.
at that point, I just kept writing that way, and no one
Yeah.
said anything really from that point on. I mean, people would still make comments or laugh, but like not in a mean way. It was just like, I think in junior high, I had a shop teacher called me like Neanderthal boy because I was like writing like that. But he was cool. Mr. Hackworth was his name. But then yeah, and in junior high, I had Mr. Dave Matthews was his name, the art teacher. No relation to the singer, but and then
That's so
in high
funny.
school, yeah, I had Mrs. Diane Gladio, and they were all great. Like and then yeah, in high school they let me, Mrs. Gladio let me take like extra art classes, and then we always had like this one. Our high school had like this scheduling called block scheduling, where you only had 4 classes a day, and every other day you would have 4 different classes, so like 8 classes total. But like you would have, you know,
Mm-hmm.
they would they would stagger, and you would have like a study, everyone had like a study hall period at the same time. So if you were struggling, you could go like get help. But I would always go to the art room, and it was almost like an extra art class. So I always had like parents and family members and friends and teachers encouraging me. So I know I was lucky, because some kid artists don't have that, but I always had like a good support system around me that recognized my passion for drawing at a young age, and they kind of helped, you know, build that up throughout my career as a
I mean,
kid. And yeah.
yeah, dude. Like, look at even those banners behind you of like your past
Yeah.
works and stuff. Like, it's beautiful. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Um, so then college. Now, what was college like? Going to like art school. What
Yeah,
was it?
so it was a regular state
Okay.
university. I was an art major.
Yeah.
So it was great. I mean, I lucked out because I had a great like advisor teacher there, Charlie Canwisher, who's still at BGSU, Bowling Green State University. He's like the head of the art department now. And he was awesome too, because he recognized like that I had this passion for storytelling specifically. So he would challenge me to like draw from life, like, like in
Mm-hmm.
nature and like the human form and all that stuff, and try to, you know, get as good as I could at like not drawing cartoony, draw from life, and then do the cartoony stuff, but take what I was, the techniques from drawing realistically and combine that into your cartoons. And I still do that today. Like when I think of these things and design them, they look super cartoony and they're bouncy, but I think that's because I spent so much time like studying like
Mm-hmm.
anatomy and like real life, that it's easier to kind of, once you understand all that stuff, to kind of bend it to be a little bit more cartoony. So he really challenged me in that area. And he would always he would be realistic with all of us, because there was other students and other people that wanted to be comic book artists, and he's like, look, it's going to be hard to make a living doing that. And he would like be honest with us, but then he would pull me aside and he'd be like, I think you can do it though. Like you seem to have the patience and the understanding. So I always appreciated that. Like another support, like, and I still talk to him
That's
today.
awesome.
So yeah, but it was cool too, because I lived with some of my other friends that were not artists, and they would always get mad at me at the end of the semesters or whatever, because I would be like in the apartment, like doing a fun painting or like drawing a comic or something. I'm like, yeah, this is for my final project. And they were like studying and staying up all night. I'm like, well, you should have been an art major then. I don't know what to tell you. They're like, you just get to draw all the time. So
That's
yeah.
that's so
Yeah.
awesome. I actually took one comic-esque class
Oh,
in
cool.
college. Yeah, it was really cool. It was called The History of Graphic Narrative. So
That
he
sounds
like
interesting.
yeah, it was cool. Like we started out looking at like cave paintings from like,
Yeah.
whatever to like working into like modern comics and stuff. So like we spent a whole bunch of time and like it was wild there for a minute, let me tell you. But I loved it because at the end like he gave us this little like free like comics program that like the school had access to for us, and we were able to make our own comic for like that final project or whatever.
Oh man, that is cool.
So yeah, that was a blast. That was a real blast. Um, but as you were talking about um, your teacher in college there, talking about like the different forms and stuff, got me thinking about one of our questions we got submitted from Anthony at Cartoonist by Night.
Oh
Said
yeah,
for
he's a good
you.
guy. Yeah.
Yeah, he was, and your appearance on their episode, like I think like a week, not that long ago, was
Yeah.
really great. You
Oh,
guys
thank you.
drawing Batman the
Yeah.
animated series and stuff, just talking
Yeah.
that, like, come on, it was great. But Anthony asks, what are the benefits when drawing human characters, and are there different benefits to drawing animal characters?
Yeah. So actually let me answer first the animal side. So that just feels more natural for me. And I think it's because of my like growing up, like drawing like DuckTales and Rescue Rangers and Darkwing Duck and Looney Tunes characters and different things like that. Hanna-Barbera characters, of course, Yogi Bear. But it, everyone can relate to like a cartoon animal, right? There's less you have to be conscious about, because it's like this is a squirrel and that's all you need to know about it. The human characters, you have to be a little bit more like self-aware when you're working on those, because it's like there's so many other factors that go into it. And also with the animal characters, there's a certain quality that comes out in them almost that feels more like me than when I draw human characters. Not to say I don't like the wrestling characters back there, are great and I love them all, but these goofy, silly, cartoony characters, I feel like there's just by drawing in that style, like the Oh Yeah comics,
Mm-hmm.
from Martin Franco, like drawing in that style, you can really get crazy with the storytelling, but it feels like it makes sense. And
Uh-huh.
with human characters, there's a little bit more restriction. You can still get wacky, as you know from Agents of Slam. A lot of weird stuff happens in that book, but yeah, uh, you still got to keep it somewhat grounded. So,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, they have their own benefits. I don't know, like human characters maybe. There are a lot of people that don't like they think the animal characters are for kids, which mine usually are.
Mm-hmm.
But there's other great books with animal characters like Mouse and different
Mm-hmm.
things out there, that use animals. But yeah, I don't know. I think I prefer the animal characters if I have a choice, but sometimes you kind of need the human characters to, like, for a wrestling book like that. I felt like when Dave Scheid and I were working on that, I don't think we ever considered animal characters because we were trying to kind of capture that 80s
Mm-hmm.
nostalgia for pro wrestling. But
Yeah.
now that I think about it, it would have been kind of cool if they were animals also. So I don't know.
Hey, give us the sequel.
Yeah, there you go.
Um,
And we won't explain why they're animals. They'll just be
Not
animals.
at all.
Yeah.
No explanation. Just go and
Yeah.
just diving in head first. That'd be great.
Yeah. There'll be a Sasquatch in there for Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. You got
Yeah.
it. um, so actually, another interview Man, you're just making the rounds recently. But another interview I saw was from your local news station.
Oh yeah,
They called it Behind the Pen when you were getting ready for the comic festival, right? Or the art festival at your old high
yeah,
school.
yeah.
Um,
The Teen
and
Book Festival, yeah, here in
there you go.
Northwest Ohio, yeah, at my old high school, yeah.
And one thing I found out that I did not know before in all the time that I've known you is that you're also an art director.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So I have a day job, like as many comic people do. Yeah, I work for a company called Applied Learning here in Northwest Ohio, and it couldn't be more different from comics in a lot of ways because we do like visual learning tools for like big companies that might be like rolling out a new strategy or something.
Okay.
So I've worked there for, I don't know, like 16, 17 years. And over that long span, I've like met a lot of cool artists and eventually helped hire some cool artists. So worked with people like Corey Barba, Merrill Rainey, Geneva Hodgson, Isaac Klunk, Ben White, Aaron Greener, Allison Kaur, yeah, to name a few. But
Right.
they've all went on to like work and do cool different things after they've worked there. So
That's awesome.
it's been a
Yeah.
cool way to meet like other creative people, and some of them aren't even comic. Like Corey went into like animation in Geneva, and then Merrill Rainey does like children's books, like paper toy books and stuff. So
Oh,
yeah, that
nice.
that company helped like foster all these different artists and like gather us together in Northwest Ohio of all places. So that's
That's
also how I got my connection to Art and Franco, was through Corey Barba at that job, because he
oh
used to
wow.
work with Art Baltazar in Chicago in the
Uh-huh.
90s. Yeah.
Oh man.
No,
Um,
everything's connected.
yeah, right. It's all connected. It's all
Yeah.
part of the matrix. It's all part of the Spider Verse, if you
Yeah.
will. Multiverse. I mean,
Yeah.
let's keep it going, right?
Yeah. Scoot verse.
um, but so like aside from then being an art director, then and doing comics, like comics, I've seen you do comics, kids lit, and stuff. What made you kind of focus there on that area of like of that area of storytelling and whatnot?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I used to, when I was in college, I focused more on like this was the early 2000s when like Top Cow and like all those comics were big. So I was trying to make like a gritty like superhero book, and I drew it more like comic booky,
Mm-hmm.
style, I guess, cross hatching and all that detail and stuff. And it was fun, and I did it. But then after going to the shows and bringing my portfolio, it's like it didn't feel natural for me. You know what I mean? To work in that style. And
Mm-hmm.
then I started um, working on Sammy the Samurai Squirrel. I was inspired by Super Mario Galaxy for the Nintendo Wii, just how wacky and zany that was and how fun it was. I'm like, I want to make something that captures the spirit of this game, but make it a cartoon. And then once I just started working it, it just came very natural to me. And then that was around the same time that I started working on Oh Yeah Comics with Art and Franco.
Yeah.
So Art liked the story and Franco, and um, I thought, well, why don't I tweak the way I was drawing Sammy? Because even though I was drawing it cartoony, she was still like it was like a little bit gritty feel to it. And I
Okay.
wanted to really clean it up and make it even more simplified and just have that extra like bounce and pep. So that's how Sammy evolved into this look and feel here. And yeah, that's how I kind of switched to that kid style. It just came natural for me. Like it didn't feel like work to draw in that style.
Okay. Nice. In comics now, for yourself, you talked about Batman Adventures. Would you go? Is there any other particular artist or writer or inker or anything like that that you would say was like a big influence on yourself, your style, or like how you create that way?
Yeah. Yeah, cool. Yeah, instead of, I mean, obviously like Bruce Timm and Darwin Cook, those guys, fantastic. Those are probably like my top ones. But other than that, I always liked Scott McDaniel, who's like the illustrator for Nightwing back in the 90s. I always liked, he had like a cartoony, like kind
Mhm.
of like clunky, bulky style, but it was really appealing to me. And of course, I was inspired by artists like Jim Lee and that generation, just and Todd McFarlane, because their style had a little bit of it captured that like stylized look, kind of like the Jose Luis Garcia Lopez Justice League. Like Jim Lee
Mm-hmm.
became like that for the X-Men, I thought. And yeah, so and then of course, like going back to the cartoony side, it was like the Carl Barks, like Scrooge McDuck books, those duck books and stuff, like that
Nice.
style. So one cool thing to note though is I got to meet and hang out with a little bit Darwin Cook before he passed at Cincinnati Comic Expo. Me and the All Yeah crew were down there, Art Baltazar and Alejandro, and we got to like hang out with him and go to dinner and stuff. And he was really cool. Like he was a great guy. So he didn't disappoint meeting him in person, and
Nice.
obviously being like a legend in the comics
Yeah, I
world. So
mean, yeah,
yeah.
no doubt he's done some of some of the best stories out there. I mean, yeah, that's awesome. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, that's awesome. Um, uh, but for you now, what about comics as like a storytelling or graphic narrative, as like a storytelling medium? Like, what do you love most about
I think that I can create like a whole world, like where I was saying before, like if I went into animation, you rely on a lot of different people to kind of help your vision get through.
it?
But in comics, you can kind of, if you want to, take the time to, you can create like the whole story. You can write it, draw it, color it, ink it. Like you can do everything and kind of make these worlds like really the way you envision it in your head. So I think that's one of the coolest things. But also like the same time lately, since Sammy and I did another book called The Super Kings, um I've been working with other creators, and that's always good too because you can bounce ideas off of each other, and you can they'll see things maybe differently than I saw them, but you can kind of collaborate. So I think, but it still has that same energy of like you're working together to create this thing, and there's really nobody looking over your shoulder, or there's usually no time constraints or things like that. So it's just like um it's a very loose and um exciting way to tell stories, I think. Yeah.
Nice. Now, for some of your early work, before you were like on your road to like being published and everything, like
Hmm.
with Sammy there, Cthulhu Jr. and Friends,
Yeah.
Agents of Slam again, Wrapped Up. Like, because I found out about like you at first from Wrapped Up with Dave.
Yeah.
So
I,
following it from like me and Dave knowing each other, and then meeting you at C2E2 one time, and like the rest is like history and stuff.
yeah.
Um, and so did you, before you got, like I said, before you got published, were you making like web comics, zines, anything like that, to try and get your like name out there and try and get some like work or get some like recognition or anything like that?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it was I would I didn't do any I did end up doing web comics, but it was kind of later. Like all this stuff with my comics publishing kind of started happening around the same time, like 2012, 2013. But before then, yeah, I would make like the little booklets, like the little zines or zines, whatever you
Mhm.
call them, and I would bring those to shows and like hand them out for free. So I was like not making any money, but I was like hoping like I might give this to a publisher or give this to another writer, and they might, call me or write me back or whatever. And it never happened except for one person, and that was Art Baltazar. Kind of remembered me and asked me to join the Oh Yeah Comics, like he called it the bullpen of artists that were working on the Oh Yeah Comics books. So I mean, yeah, I used to, like I said, I used to make those all the time and go to shows and hand those out. I used to go with my buddy Jay Christopher Schmidt, who lives in Cleveland area, who's also a great comic artist. And the two of us were both like, this is what you have to do is bring your portfolio, and you got to go there and you got to show it to people. But as I found out, it's like you just have to meet and network with fellow creators, and they'll help you kind of find your path.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So then I guess my next question that I gotta ask is, how do you meet Dave?
Yeah,
How do you
yeah.
guys get hooked up?
So yeah, I met Dave Scheit, collaborating partner of Wrapped Up and Agents of Slam, and hopefully future works that we got, which I'll get to later. But I met Dave because Dave, I don't know, he knew Art Baltazar because they're both Chicago guys, and Dave used to, you know, talk to Art when he was a little kid. So Art remembered Dave like when he had like a bowl cut and stuff, when he would
Mhm.
come to like get drawings and cartoons and stuff. So I met him back then. This is probably around 2013 or 14. Oh yeah, Comics in Skokie, Illinois used to do like a lot of parties, like the weekend of C2E2. They would do a party at the shop, or like the anniversary party, or like a signing party. And one of these parties, it might have been their Itty Bitty Hellboy book. Dave was at the shop hanging
Okay.
out, and I was there in town, and I was drawing like on a drawing pad, just drawing silly stuff. And Art introduced me, I think, to Dave as This is my friend Sasquatch. That's what Art called him. Like, oh, how's it going? And I drew a picture of a Sasquatch with like stink lines coming off of it. And yeah, it was just a friendship since then. So Dave started telling me like to draw different things. And like other people were sincerely asking me to like draw stuff on there. It'd be like draw Lilo and Stitch, like doing blah blah blah, and I would draw it, and Dave would come over and like make fun of it and stuff. So and that made me laugh. So yeah, we just that's where we met. And then he was also writing, oh yeah, comic stories at that time, but he's not an artist, so he would always have to like find an artist or collaborate. And I think he asked me, he's like, do you want to work on one, like a 4-page story that I wrote? I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. So that was like technically our first published comic we did together, was one of the short stories in an Oh Yeah Comics book. And yeah, the rest is history. We chat all the time and send each other funny memes and make fun of each other. And he'll send me a picture of like a really old guy, and he'll be like, look, I found your dad. And we'll go to comic shows, and there'll be like a weird dude walking around with like an old dude wearing like a Star Trek shirt, and he'll bump me. He's like, there's your dad over there. So we just start teasing each other like that. And yeah, it's
That's
fun.
so awesome. I mean,
Yeah.
I've seen you guys at shows together. It's great. It's you guys are a blast. It's so much fun. Um, but then so how do you get to even Cthulhu Junior and Friends
Yeah.
then with
So
Dirk?
that's another, yeah. So Dirk Manning actually lives in the Northwest Ohio. Hey, there it is. He lives in the Northwest Ohio area here. And just so happens, and he goes to all the big shows like I do.
Mhm.
And he goes to all the little shows too, which I don't do too many of those. I mean, I've whittled my shows down a lot since I had kids, but um so he's in a totally different genre than me, where I was normally do the cartoons. He's in the horror genre.
Yeah.
And we met at a Toledo show called Fantasticon here in Toledo. And yeah, we just started, I was introduced to him, and we live in the area. So we'd like, start chatting back and forth. And sometimes we traveled to shows, and we were both traveling to the Cincinnati Comic Expo one year. And we came up with the idea for Cthulhu Junior, and we created the whole book on a 3-hour drive from Toledo to Cincinnati, just like talking. And I was sketching in a sketchbook. And then, some time had passed, and we're like, hey, maybe we should do that book. So I like took my notes from a sketchbook and created an outline and sent it to Dirk, and he scripted it out, and it pretty much followed that same outline that we created in a 3-hour car ride. So it just goes to show, like, when you have an idea for something, sometimes it just like spills out.
Hmm.
And there again, we did it without a publisher, so we can kind of make it the way we wanted. And then when we were ready to, when the book was complete, he took it to Source Point Press, and they published it through a Kickstarter. So yeah, and then we got cool plushies, and you got the T-shirt there. So yeah, it was a fun book, and people still dig it at the shows. And it's not that old either. I mean, it came out like right after the pandemic, so it's kind of has legs, because I wasn't doing really any shows for a while there. So
Yeah.
to a lot of people, it's like this is the first time they're getting it. So yeah, it's been
It's
cool.
it's great. You guys, like, if you again, like, the Kickstarter is long been over, but like, you guys can get it from yourselves, and like you and Dirk, when you guys show up to shows and everything
Yep.
like that.
There will be a
But
C2E2.
yeah, one thing that I am happy about is that I got a cool hardcover edition of it too,
Oh,
because I did see the Kickstarter.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I like that hardcover cover. It's different. It's got like, that was my favorite cover. Oh, and stay tuned because um I'm not saying a sequel is coming, but I will say maybe like a different format for the book might be coming. So
Ooh,
that's all I'm gonna say. Yeah.
ooh.
Yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. Um, and then so God, man, wrapped up in Agents of Slam, Cthulhu Jr., and then you also worked on a Dead Man book
Oh yeah, yeah.
for DC. Dead Man is one of my favorite, most random DC characters ever because he doesn't always get a lot of love, but when he does, the people who always work on him love the character. I love the world and stuff that they get to play in and everything with it. So tell me how that came about a little bit for you, working on that
So
book.
yeah, so that was with Franco of Art and Franco Aya
Mhm.
Comics, who I also work with. I would say right now I'm working the most with Dave and Franco on different various projects that are in the mix. But Franco was he wrote all those Dead Man stories in the book, and I think of it as kind of like a Goosebumps type book or like a
Mhm.
Tales from the Crypt, but for a younger audience. And yeah, Franco approached me and he's like, "Hey, do you want to do a story for DC?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course, like that would be awesome." And then he's like, "Well, we're doing this book and it takes place in Gotham City." And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "But we can't draw Batman or anyone." And I was like, "Oh man." He's like, "But the only Batman character in the book is going to be Man Bat, and I want you to draw that story." So that was cool. So if you are familiar with, obviously you read it, what I did is I drew Man Bat in that story, but when I colored it, I color dropped an issue of Batman Adventures, so it kind of has that same feel of the Batman Adventures with the red sky and everything. And
Nice.
yeah, that was kind of really fun, and I'm thankful to him for like asking me if to be a part of that because that was my first DC book, and it was really fun to draw the Man Bat in Gotham City. So that was cool.
That's oh man, that's so great. Yeah,
Yeah.
and your man bat's great. I mean,
Oh, thank you.
again, like your commissioned work is amazing.
That would be
It
my
speaks
next
for
dream
itself.
job, to draw that Ninja Turtle comic as monsters where you write it and I draw it. That would be a good.
I mean, I'm down, down. I like okay. I got
Yeah,
an
let's do it.
outline.
Well, it's out there now, so maybe someone will hear this by chance and they'll reach out to us.
That'd be great. So to be fair, I do have a turtles story, but it's not necessarily for the brothers, which is
Oh,
why
okay.
I have a turtle story because it
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily the brothers are obviously like involved, but it's not really about them. It's actually
Oh,
about
cool.
my favorite turtle characters, the Triceratons.
Oh yeah, those guys. Yeah, they don't get enough love. I mean, actually, I should take that back. In the 2012 series, they played a prominent role and they were fantastic. But that's really the only, like, they've appeared in like the 2003 and stuff, but not to that extent. So yeah, the Triceratons are cool. They were always good in the old video games too from the 90s. They were in
Yep.
there. Yep.
So yeah, I do have a take for that. That I would do in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Um, but other than that, I don't really have anything else. That's the only one that I've ever really thought about. Um, but for you now, so you've done original work, you've done some licensed work and stuff. If there is something that is there a licensed piece that you want to like just put out there and be like, hey, I want to do this. I
Oh
would
yeah.
love to do something like this.
I I would
Or
love
do
to
you even
write a
have
Nightwing book.
a
Yeah.
Nightwing book?
Yeah. Yep. That's what I would
Nice.
love to do. Yeah.
Nightwing is the only other character other than the Turtles that I still collect, like superhero wise, that I have collected weekly. I've
Yeah.
even gone back to those original Chuck Dixon and Scott McDaniel ones. I'm
Yeah.
almost re-caught up on all of those, but everything from probably the new 52 on, I have in like almost a single issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nightwing, I always thought was cool because he just had that like dynamic with Batman that was like a little like they grew apart, but they still
Mhm.
respect each other. And there's so much to do with that, I think. And they've brought him back to where he's more like Robin now in the books. But I always liked it when he had a little bit more edge to him, like in the animated series where him and Bruce didn't really get along. You know,
Yeah.
that's a version of Nightwing I like.
I mean, Nightwing is my like all-time favorite character. So
Oh,
it,
cool.
like it just warms my heart of you hearing that.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I mean, like we were talking about influences and stuff before, like George Perez, like Marv Wolfman, like
Yeah. Of
their
course.
stuff, their
Yep.
creation of it, like even like yeah, it's the McDaniels and the Dixon stuff that like we all like kind of know from the '90s and stuff because that's where
Yeah.
he finally got his own run and wasn't just with Batman, just wasn't with the Teen Titans and
Yep.
stuff. They finally took the wheels off and they gave they gave our boy a chance to run and stuff. Um, so yeah, that was man, all good stuff, all good stuff.
Well, the other reason for Nightwing too is like he's a good character to have like from his perspective because you can have him interact with that Batman universe, you know. But
Mhm.
unlike Batman, like he talks more and stuff, so I feel like it would be just more fun to do like a Nightwing story, you know. I
Yeah,
think Dave and I would do a good Nightwing story, DC, if you
yeah,
are out there.
yeah. Please, please, that would be great actually. Um, so we've got a few more questions here
Okay.
for you. Um, First one, what is one piece of advice that you have now that you wish you had when you started out? What is one piece of advice, or one piece of advice, I guess, then that you would give to somebody now that you didn't have when you started out?
Yeah, I guess it's people probably heard it a lot now, but back then, you know, making a comic feels so daunting, especially back then, because I felt like I had to like match a certain style and that was what was like holding me down. Draw the most easy style or whatever comes natural for you and just make like a 20-page comic. Just staple it together, do whatever you got to do. But once you get that first comic done, it's like you feel like you can do anything because like you look through that thing and it doesn't have to be perfect, you know. It's but just don't stress about like each panel and how the composition of this page, like just make it and you can worry about all that stuff in your second book. You know, you pick one thing out, like I can do a better job this time at composition and then focus on that. And then the next one, it's like, okay, I can do a better job at like action scenes or whatever it is. Or so just make a book, do it in the most natural way. Don't worry about it being perfect. It can even be like stick people, but just like look at the Dave Pilkey books. Like those are really crudely drawn, but they're silly and they're fun. And that's like his natural style. So just do whatever is easiest to complete that first book just to get it on paper. And then you can even use that first book as like uh what do you call it, like a skeleton or like a rough. Like if you really like the story, you can always go back and redraw it in a more detailed style, but just getting it out on paper and getting it complete and finishing it, because I know there's a lot of people that struggle with finishing books. And like I said, when I was in college for one of my projects, I wrote a comic called The Original about it. Like, it was like a gritty superhero story, and it took forever because I thought I had to draw on like this traditional like superhero style, and it was like kind of tedious to get through. I mean, I eventually did, but I feel like I would have had a much better experience if I did like a more cartoony style back then. So do what you're comfortable with, and don't worry about all that other stuff for your first book. Just make the book and then you can worry about the other stuff later.
That is probably one of the most common things that I hear from any kind of creator, writer, artist,
Yeah.
editor. Like so far, both all three of you, Chris in episode one, Dave in episode two, and you here, have all said create it and make it.
Yeah.
Do it. Put it.
Yep.
Put pen to paper and make it. You got to do it. And
Yeah.
like, because, you know, as a writer, you can always rewrite. As an artist, you can always redesign. You can
Yeah.
recomposition everything, as you were saying. You can go back and redo it, but you can't redo it. You can't make it better. You can't improve it unless you do it the first time. So
Yeah, it seems like common sense, but I think people really need to hear that. And I probably could have I would have wanted to hear that more back then when I was like working on that book, because like I said, it was tedious and it was time consuming and it felt like a slog to get through it. And it should have been way more fun. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So second question here. What is the last great thing that you've read? Whether it be a comic, a book, a script, or if you reread a favorite.
Yeah. Let me see if I can pull this up here. I mean, you won't be able to see it, but I just want to make sure I pronounce the name right. It's called Unnatural Ohio, and it's a history of like ghost stories, cryptids, legends, urban myths, UFO stories from Ohio. And it's by a cool guy named Kevin Elmore, who I met at the Teen Book Fest, and Christina Smith. And yeah, that was the most recent thing I read, so it's fresh in my head. But I love like stuff about like, yeah, like UFOs and ghost stories and urban legends and all that stuff. And this one is about it's all Ohio based stories, so it's like cool to think of like, oh, I've been to that place before. And so it's just well made, and there's cool like little illustrations and different things and images from the time period that people might be like pointing to or whatever. So I'm into like, if it's a non-comic book like that, that's a cool thing that I've read recently that I would recommend. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
That sounds great. I love having like stories that take place in your own like backyard or whatever, for things and whatnot. Like for us in like Chicago, it's like Devil in the White City and whatnot, like all of that, H.H.
Yeah.
Holmes and like all of that. That's also great during the World's Fair and whatnot, reading all that kind of stuff, because it's like the old crazy history of Chicago and
Yeah.
everything. But so that's really great. And the third thing, well, actually, yeah, last thing then I'm going to ask you is there anything you want to promote, or are you going to be appearing anywhere soon?
Yes. So soon, in the end of April, I will be in Chicago. I will be at C2E2. Hopefully I'll see you there. Um, and I will be tabled, unfortunately, with Dave Scheid again at table Z8. So right next to Art and Franco, row Z, the last row, but it's actually like the first row closest to like all the stuff. So we're easy to access there. Um, yeah, I'll be there all 3 days. I'm also doing every summer I do like library shows. So if any of these viewers are in the Northwest Ohio area, I'll be advertising which library show I'm going to do. And what I do at these library shows is I always do like a workshop, like a drawing workshop. So I think in June. Let me just make sure I have the date correct, but I'll actually be, and this is crazy, but I'll be the first time ever at the Rossford Public Library. So I live in Rossford, but I've never been to the Rossford Library to do a show. So that's going to be exciting. But it's like June, I want to say like around Father's Day. I'll have to look closer, but like the June 16th or 15th or something. It might even be June 8th, but I'll post about it. So if you follow me on social media, it's at Scoot Comics on Instagram and Twitter or X, whatever it's called. And then I'm also on Facebook at Scott McMahon. So
Yeah.
yeah, but those are the appearances. And then the other part of that question, which unfortunately I can't really answer, like stuff I want to promote and work on, because obviously you've promoted Wrapped Up and Agents of Slam and Sammy, and Cthulhu Jr. I'll have all that stuff available at C2E2. I'm also going to have copies of Spot on Adventure. I don't know if you have that one, Jimmy, but that's a book I wrote with Frank. I co-created with Franco. I drew the whole book, and it hasn't been in print in a while, but I'm going to have copies of it at C2E2. And then Dead Man Tells the Spooky Tales. I'll have that one, and probably some other. I'll go into my boxes and see what other comics I can bring out of the archives to bring to C2E2. But again, I'm working on a bunch of projects, a few with Dave, a few with Franco. I got some other ideas, but they're all in that early stages where we're pitching things. So I don't want to jinx ourselves by saying anything, but we got, especially Dave and I, we're working on some silly ideas, and then Franco and I have some. I'm actually drawing it right now, but I can't show you. But Franco and I have a really funny comic
Oh,
we're
nice.
working on. So hopefully I'll be able to talk about those the next time, if you have me on next time.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
but
Believe me, I hope to have you on again, and I know I will. It'll
cool.
be great. But yeah, so Scoot, with all of this, man, we're gonna wrap it up. Did not mean for that to happen. That was just great. But yeah, so I'm gonna wrap it up. I really appreciate you joining me here, man. Give Scoot a follow at Scoot Comics on Instagram and on X, and go follow him on Facebook and all of that stuff. Go follow his website if you want to go check out some of his other works that he's done, like from everything on there. He's got a couple of first issues of a bunch of different digital first issues you've done. You've got a bunch of your different illustrations and probably other commissions and stuff you've done up there. So if you want to check out more of his work, go check out scootcomics.com. That's his website. Go check him out there. And yeah, so I am Jimmy with the Triple C Collective. This is Scoot McMahon. Thank you
with
for
Scoot
joining
Comics.
me.
Yeah.
And I hope you all stay safe. Please like and subscribe to this video and to our channel. And we're all wrapped. See you guys.